Articles of Faith is a weekly interview show featuring scholars and writers who have written about the doctrines and teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Articles of Faith is a production of Fair Mormon and is hosted by Nick Galletti.
Craig L. Foster is our guest on this episode. Prior to graduating from BYU, Craig L. Foster served as a missionary in Belgium and France. Craig Foster earned a bachelor's degree in history and has 2 master's degrees, one in history with an emphasis in British history, and a master's degree in library and information science, both received from BYU. He's also an accredited genealogist and works as a research consultant at the Family History Library in Salt Lake City. He has published books and articles on various aspects of Mormon history. Some of his writings on Mormon history discuss the history and theology of plural marriage within the context of Mormonism. Craig is also on the editorial board of the John Whitmer Historical Association Journal. Craig is the author of the article Separated But Not Divorced, the LDS Church's Uncomfortable Relationship with Its Polygamous Past, found in the Interpreter, Journal of Mormon Scripture. Welcome, Craig Foster.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in. So when it comes to your formal education, you seem to be perfectly qualified to be working in and running a genealogical library. Was that the goal?
Well, that's a good question. Not really.
Okay.
The goal was to study history and write about history, but I've always had an interest in family history and genealogy, and it just worked out that I was able to get a job at the Family History Library, and I have enjoyed it very much, continue to enjoy it. I work as a research specialist on the British floor, helping people look for their British ancestors. So I enjoy it very much.
No, I guess you'd have to, right?
Yes.
You do that every day. So I was looking on the internet and I found your Mormon Scholars Testify entry, and it states that you study LDS church history, that it has not injured your faith, but in fact it has strengthened it. With so many people discovering events in church history and coming to different conclusions, perhaps less faithful conclusions, if that's the way we want to say it, what is it that's brought you to your conclusion? How is it that you've come out, I guess, on the other end of that tunnel?
Well, I have approached history, including, and I guess you could say especially, LDS history, with the idea that everyone is human, including our prophets, and so they make mistakes. As for me, studying Joseph Smith's life, I have seen where he made mistakes, and sometimes they were big mistakes. And we certainly see examples where God chastised Joseph Smith more than once through the Doctrine and Covenants. But for me, just studying his life and his actions, it helped me gain a better appreciation, and it helped my testimony to grow, because I saw how here was a man not perfect, far from it at times, and that God took him and worked with him and used him as a prophet. And quite frankly, if I look at what Joseph Smith went through, if he was a charlatan, he would have run off long before he ended up in Carthage. If he was just there for the fame and the glory and the money and as some people say, the women, okay, you get a certain amount of that and then you say, I better get out of here. But when Joseph Smith had the opportunity to flee, he returned. And for me, that just I already had a strong testimony of the gospel, but looking at that just reconfirmed for me that he certainly wasn't a charlatan. And then there have been other aspects of Mormon history where studying it in depth has helped me gain a stronger appreciation and for what they went through and for the restored gospel, and ultimately has helped strengthen my testimony.
Well, you have written on the subject of polygamy. Why? Why, of all the things you can study, would you pick polygamy?
Well, there are several reasons. One is, the first reason, I guess, is a personal reason. I come from polygamous ancestors, so obviously I wanted to get a better understanding of it. My great-grandfather had 5 wives and 30 children, and I come from the 5th wife, 26th child. My mother remembered some of her aunts and uncles who had also entered into plural marriage. She was old enough that she remembered them, and so there were very strong feelings regarding that, and not all good feelings either in the family. And I started out just wanting to understand a little bit more where this was coming from. Now, growing up, I knew that Joseph Smith had plural wives. We talked about that, and we talked about other aspects of plural marriage. But I wanted to go a step further and try to understand what life was like. And in the process, I wrote about it, and then also for my thesis when I was at BYU, it was on anti-Mormon pamphleteering in Great Britain during the 1800s. And so obviously polygamy came up in my research, and so those things combined, I decided, well, why don't we go a step further? And Newell Bringhurst and I, who's a friend of mine and a historian, we decided to do the 3-volume series, The Persistence of Polygamy. So I came with a pretty strong background of having researched plural marriage. He actually didn't come with that strong of a background, having researched plural marriage. He had done a lot on race and Mormonism and other issues like that, including a really good biography on Brigham Young. But in fact, when we got started, he commented that he hadn't ever written really on polygamy, other than during his biography of Brigham Young. And he commented that as far as he knew, he didn't have any polygamous ancestors. Since that time, he has found out that he has 3 polygamous ancestors. So it's been a learning experience for him, and it's really been a learning experience for both of us as we have got really good scholars to write essays, and we've edited them, and of course have written our own essays, starting with the first book deals just during the lifetime of Joseph Smith. The second volume is from 1844 to 1890, the first manifesto. And the third volume, which we hope will be out this fall, if not, then early next year, deals with from 1890 to the present.
And who's putting those out?
John Whitmer Books.
Okay. So part of the Historical Association.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I want to, I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything, but I want you to be able to gauge the validity or the practical application, perhaps, of the following statement. Polygamy is a fulfillment of the promises of the Abrahamic covenant.
Interesting. I don't think it's the complete fulfillment if it means that it has completely ceased. I am one of those, and we're getting fewer and far between, I guess. But I am one of those who believes that that plural marriage is an eternal principle. And
is it a manifestation of that covenant, then?
It is indeed a manifestation of the Abrahamic covenant. So I'm sorry if I misunderstood there. Absolutely. And it even makes reference to that in section 132. But I do believe that it is that it is an eternal principle. Is it the complete? Is celestial marriage only plural marriage? No, I don't think so. I think that celestial marriage is eternal marriage, and that can be monogamous or that can be a plurality of wives. And but I do believe that, for example, the sealings that have taken place, with Joseph Smith and his plural wives, and on through the 1800s with various Latter-day Saints that those are eternal sealings and that they will be together forever. So I do believe that it continues, but it certainly is an aspect of the Abrahamic covenant as stated in 132.
Well, and is there any value to looking at the idea that because this was never, even when polygamy was openly practiced, it was never a requirement of the membership? You didn't lose your temple recommend if you weren't polygamous.
No,
right?
no. And so obviously there'll be both, at least I believe there'll be both monogamous and polygamous marriages in the celestial kingdom.
Excellent. Well, let's move on to your article now that appears in the Interpreter. It's and I guess it's clear from our discussion that it again deals with polygamy, but it's entitled "Separated but Not Divorced: The LDS Church's Uncomfortable Relationship with Its Polygamous Past." Now, you state in the article, I'm going to quote it. It says, "This essay will examine the uncomfortable relationship between the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and its polygamous past, and the effect this discomfort has had on its members. I will examine examples of members' expression of discomfort over a polygamous heritage and conclude with suggestions of possible pathways to its reconciliation." End quote. So the purpose of this article is really to not shy away from the fact that it's been a difficult issue?
Right. It may end up being a controversial article. I hope not, but I have.
Oh, it's polygamy. It's going to have some.
Okay.
It's going to have some controversy.
I guess that's true. I have dealt with, on a personal basis, a lot of manifested discomfort by Latter-day Saints over the church's polygamous past, and it at times has been heartbreaking. As I've, tried to help people deal with polygamy, as when they find out. I remember, and I mentioned this in the article, I remember one lady, we were riding on a bus, and we had commuting between Provo and Salt Lake. And so day in and day out, we'd be on the bus, and a group of us would visit. And so I remember one time, just in passing, I said something about Joseph Smith's polygamous wives. And she got a very offended look on her face, and she said, "He did not have polygamous wives. Brigham Young might have done that, but Joseph never would." And I just let it drop.
Right, because there was a bomb waiting to go off.
Yes. But that really kind of reflects how a lot of members react when they hear that Joseph Smith had plural wives. And it's
which is a strange reaction when you think that they're so comfortable with Brigham.
Yes.
Like, why does that change anything?
I've always wondered that. And my other comment has always been, you've read 132, right? That Joseph received that. Now, do you think he said, okay, everyone else, you have polygamous wives, but I won't? But a lot of people do kind of approach it with that attitude that, no, Joseph wouldn't do that. He's up on a pedestal. He wouldn't have plural wives.
He's perfect.
And they were married. I mean, so it isn't like he had a bunch of mistresses on the side. Although, quite frankly, a lot of people approach it that way because plural marriage is so foreign to us now. For most of us, I guess that there are some who are still living where it was their grandparents. I would say that most, very few, if any, it would have been their parents who had been polygamous. And so for most of us, it's our great-grandparents, or for some, even great-great-grandparents who were polygamous. And so we look at that as something very, very foreign, almost exotic or bizarre. And so we carry our 21st century biases and worldview into looking at plural marriage. And so most people look at it as something very repugnant. And we forget that these were men and women who were doing all they could to live the Word of God as they understood it, and they sacrificed a lot. So trying to deal with people like that, trying to help them, I guess that's why I wrote this and why I really have been very straightforward, is, we need to come to terms with our polygamous past, accept it, not be ashamed of it, and move forward.
Well, the church has recently released an article on their Gospel Topics page regarding this issue, and it carries with it that spirit in a way.
It does. I was thrilled to see that article, and I'm sure that isn't going to be the only one. It might be the only one addressing plural marriage specifically, but probably not. And I think the church realizes that they need to be more straightforward, and they are. They're moving in that direction, and I was just thrilled. I think they've done a really good job there.
Well, now I'm still kind of curious what makes the issue of polygamy so complex. I mean, there is biblical precedent for it,
right?
And to share a quick side story, I do sound at conventions. That's my day job, and I just so happen to work a convention for a church. I won't mention who it is, but they have a governing operation where every 4 years they get people from all over the world who come together and voice their opinion on doctrine and church practices. And one of the issues that came up was an attempt to define marriage between a man and a woman. It was meant to be a response to same-sex attraction and same-sex marriage and things like that. And in this particular case, the language of their format, or whatever I can't remember the name of it, they said that they supported biblical marriage. And one of the people that got up and voiced their displeasure for it said, well, when you say biblical marriage, that could be polygamous marriage, and that it seems to be that other faiths even recognize that their biblical ancestry has, ties to very righteous people. Yet for some reason, we see it today, and it's almost a virulent reaction. You just think, oh my gosh, this is so disgusting to me.
Well, there's a couple of reasons, I think. The first reason is we live in a time where we are very PC. We want to make sure that everyone is equal, which is good, but that includes the equality of the sexes. And people view polygyny, I should say, as being detrimental to women's
status.
Anything, women's status, women's rights, and so that's one thing. They look at that and they say that's very sexist, male chauvinist, etc., and so forth. There's another reason, and I think this reason is even more within the LDS Church. I mean, it's across all faiths, but I think the reason why Latter-day Saints kind of react with discomfort regarding plural marriage is no matter how we paint this, when you think about it, yes, obviously it involves sexuality. And people are very uncomfortable, in spite of the fact that we live in an day and age where, we are just pounded with sex everywhere we turn.
There's a lot of promiscuity, yeah.
Absolutely. But they are uncomfortable with the idea that their ancestors, or particularly that these prophets of God, had more than one wife in terms of sexuality. And so I understand that discomfort. I don't know. I've never really been that uncomfortable because I've always approached it, well, they're his wives, right? Yeah, so what's the problem? But there are people who, they may not even realize it on the surface, but there are always those undertones of sexuality, and Did Brigham Young really have sex with all of his wives? Well, the answer is no, of course not.
That'd be a pretty full calendar.
Yeah, well, and plural marriage is more than just sexuality.
Sure.
And that's one thing that we need to realize, and in turn let other people know, non-Mormons know that it's more than just sexuality. And Brigham Young is a great example, and so is Joseph Smith. He didn't have sexual relations with all of his wives. They were sealings. And so...
Well, I like a statement in your article that really gets to kind of the heart of the scholarship that went into this article, and you say, quote, "Even one soul lost over the now unpracticed principle of plural marriage is too many."
That is true.
And it's interesting that you say now unpracticed principle. Would it be different if it was still practiced today?
Oh, good question. Well, I think it would be in some ways. I don't think that if we were still practicing plural marriage, we would still have plural wives. We would still have lots of children, sealings in the temple, etc. But life and structure of polygynous families has changed. It has to. We are no longer an agrarian society. And quite frankly, plural marriage fits very well into an agrarian society. But I have friends who are fundamentalists.
Fundamentalists being people that still practice
yes,
it.
I'm sorry, yes, who practice plural marriage. I've watched how their households are. I've asked questions once with a few of the friends that I feel comfortable enough to ask them something, so personal as, what is life like? And there are differences. That's to be expected in a more modern society. But the basics would, I think, still be the same. And obviously, we would, as they did back then, look to the prophet to kind of be our guide as to how we should practice plural marriage, when we should practice plural marriage, and when we should not practice plural marriage.
Well, how does a member of the church own this uncomfortable relationship, as you put it, with polygamy without praising it or without demeaning it at the same time? How can you own it without making commentary on it one way or the other?
Well, I think that we should make commentary.
Oh, okay.
And I think it should be positive. Does that mean that every plural marriage was positive? Heavens, no. Not even in my own family was it always positive. But I look to what these men and women did. And most of them, you're always going to have a few bad apples, but most of them were doing what they believed God wanted them to, and not for other ulterior motives. Let me give you two examples, one of member discomfort, and two of how maybe to approach it.
Sure.
One, and I mentioned this in my article about some visitors from England. I'd been asked to show them around, so I showed them the library. I showed them the Museum of Church History and Art, and we were getting ready to go over to Temple Square for me to kind of show them around there. And they hesitantly, almost in an embarrassed way, asked, "Do you mind talking about polygamy?" And I said, "Nope, not at all." And they said, "Oh, we have some questions." And we spent at least 45 minutes, maybe almost an hour, talking about plural marriage, about the history of it, starting with Joseph Smith and going through to the time of the manifesto, of what it was like and why they practice it, and our beliefs in eternal marriage and eternal families. We got done talking about it, and they thanked me, and they said, "Every other member of the church that we have asked has either been upset or embarrassed and has not wanted to talk about it." I felt bad. I felt bad for them that they were, put into that uncomfortable situation, and I felt bad for the members because they were put into that uncomfortable situation.
Was it uncomfortable because they were undereducated, though?
I think that's what a lot of it is. I think they are undereducated. They don't know the ins and outs of it. They don't know how or why it began. They don't know how many people really practiced it and what they went through. And so, yes, a lot of it is just out of pure ignorance. And so naturally they're uncomfortable and they're kind of on the defensive. Another reason why they're on the defensive is, I mean, let's face it, there are jokes still that go on today about Mormons and polygamy.
Oh, the TV shows haven't helped.
Absolutely, right. So let me give you the other example.
Okay.
I don't want to put myself up on a pedestal because maybe it works for me and it won't for others. But whenever I'm asked by non-Mormons about Mormons and polygamy, I say, sure, we practice polygamy. My great-grandfather had 5 wives and 30 children. I come from the 5th wife, 26th child. And they go, oh my, 5 wives, 26, 30 children, and they go on and on and on for about 2 minutes, 3 at the most.
And then it's gone.
And then it's gone. And then they'll say that they may ask a few questions about, oh, okay, well, why did you practice it? And do you still practice it? And I always say, no, we don't. We stopped practicing it officially in 1890. It took a little while to die out, as would be expected, but we don't practice plural marriage anymore. There are those who practice that, but they are not Mormons. I just say it that way. It usually is more than enough for them, and after at the most 10 minutes of talking about it, we're on to something else, and we've moved on. And I have found that the best approach is to own it, to be proud of it, and I am. I always tell them, I say, I am very proud of my ancestors because they did what they believed God wanted them to do. And it was tough, and they suffered persecution for it. I'm proud of them, but we don't practice it anymore. And I always add that.
Ultimately, when you're dealing with this issue, you're still going to have people that are basing their decision in some kind of presentism kind of paradigm where it's gross to me now, that's the only frame of reference that they have. So this issue is probably still going to continue.
Oh, it will.
And persist for a little bit. But is there any one way that maybe to the person that is currently struggling with this issue, is there a piece of advice or maybe even a place that they can look to start their journey in a faithful kind of way?
Right. There are several places that they can look. One is Fair Mormon. They have wonderful articles talking about just about anything you can think of dealing with plural marriage, from Joseph Smith, all kinds of different aspects on up. And that is a great place to look. There's also the brand new website by Brian Hales, josephsmithspolygamy.org. And there's books. Brian Hale's 3-volume work, Joseph Smith's Polygamy. Our books, The Persistence of Polygamy. And so those are some good places that they can go. And they can also contact people. Fair Mormon has where they can ask any question, and there are volunteers, including myself, who will answer questions dealing with plural marriage. And the other thing that I would say is, if they discover Joseph Smith had plural wives, some of Joseph Smith's wives were young, try to remember that this is the 21st century. He lived in the 19th century. Things were different in terms of what was the proper age for a young woman to marry. Things were different in terms of a lot of stuff dealing with, God revealing new commandments, and now a commandment that we no longer practice in the present. Take these things into account, but most importantly, do what I have done when I've been troubled over finding something. Yeah, I mean, yes, studying Mormon history has helped my testimony. Has it been a steady climb? No, there have been a couple of times where I've gone, oh my, now let me think about that. And I've had to research a little bit more and do what we're supposed to do, which is we are supposed to think about it. We're supposed to read scriptures. We're supposed to pray, including fasting and praying if we need to. So for people who are troubled by aspects of Joseph Smith's polygamy or Brigham Young's or whomever else, think of the foundations. Do you have a testimony of the Book of Mormon? Was Joseph Smith a prophet to be able to translate the Book of Mormon? Yes. And then you just kind of build on that. If one thing is true, then the other thing is probably true also. Don't overreact. Slowly study about it, study it. Talk with those who are more knowledgeable. There's no shame in not being knowledgeable on a subject. There are plenty of things I am not knowledgeable about in the gospel and also in church history. And I'll go to those who I know have a better understanding and more knowledge about it. And I'll ask them, I'll say, okay, explain this to me so that I can understand it and put it within my framework. And so that's what I would strongly recommend. Don't throw it all out in one fell swoop. Think about it, study it, and don't study it by just going to the internet, because you're going to find all kinds of stuff, and half of it isn't true. Study it by going to the correct sources, and above all else, pray about it.
Absolutely. Seek learning by study and by faith.
Exactly.
And this issue of polygamy is certainly perhaps more complex than others. Even those that have a testimony of Joseph Smith as a prophet will come across this information and might feel like there needs to be there's a new hole that needs to be filled.
Exactly.
And it's your belief and your testimony that it will be filled.
I think so.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, Craig L. Foster is the writer of the article Separated But Not Divorced, the LDS Church's Uncomfortable Relationship with Its Polygamous Past. It is in the Interpreter, a Journal of Mormon Scripture. It can be found at mormoninterpreter.com. Thank you very much, Craig, for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Articles of Faith with your host, Nick Galletti. This has been a production of Fair Mormon. This and other podcasts are available at fairmormon.org. The opinions expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the views of Fair Mormon or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Please subscribe to our show in iTunes. Questions or comments can be sent to podcast@fairmormon.org. Tune in each Monday for another episode of Articles of Faith. Thank you for listening.